How to increase AI search visibility. Today I'm joined with Charles Floate.
Thanks for having me.
How are we doing? So, if anyone who wants to try to get higher rankings and also get more citations in places like Claude, Perplexity, ChatGPT, Gemini, how do you try to increase visibility within AI?
So the very first thing is you need to kind of have a defined approach of where your audience is, right? Most of your audience will be on ChatGPT. That's probably going to be the most niches. They're probably going to be in ChatGPT. But let's say you're in B2B or SaaS, it's going to be Claude right now, right? So we're going to try and figure out A, where our audience is, and then B, we're going to try and figure out how we can approach the rankings for that specific niche. In general, right now, listicles, anything to do with your own site where you can try and basically get initially in the grounded search queries that the AI model is going to be doing is the most important. So those queries actually change quite a lot depending on the model that you're using. So I was talking to you earlier about it where OpenAI and ChatGPT tend to do very, very long-winded, very formal queries that are actually extracted originally from their training data. So let's say you put in best CRM tools for accountants or something into ChatGPT, it would end up modifying the original query to best CRM for small business accountants, HubSpot versus Trello versus Atlassian, all of those kind of things, right? And you'd end up with a 16, 18 character or word long query. If you're looking at Claude, for example, they'll try and keep it between 1 and 6 words for that query, but they'll try and refine the query after the fact. So depending on what information comes back with that first search, then they're going to be doing even more searches based on that initial query's context. So first, we just got to see where your audience is. Then you've got to create the content that is going to be targeted for how the AI goes and finds the information to give to the user. And in general, there are some rules around listicles. You can't be too self-promotional. You can't have, you need to have some drawbacks. You can't be overly 100%, these are the best. There's nobody else in the entire world that can even come near to them or something along those lines, right? You need to have some level of honesty, some facts as well. And bear in mind that Claude actually does do some additional search queries to try and validate some of those facts and findings as well now.
Right, so on there with regards to the listicles then to increase search visibility within AI, you're saying that the sentiment value can't just be all positive. Mm-hmm. You then need to try and do some pros and cons and stuff like that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So, and then you mentioned grounding kind of data. What do you mean by that for anyone who's watching this?
So grounding is literally just when the AI will go and search for additional information and it's doing a grounded search. So it will go to Google if it's Gemini, it will go to Bing if it's ChatGPT, and it will do a mixture of its own kind of index and third-party sources like Google if it's Claude. The grounding is literally just making sure that it's not using its kind of outdated training data that was maybe trained from last November or something. It's making sure it has the freshest, most relevant data. And most of the AI model companies, especially if you're doing any sort of a fresh query or if it's related to current events or anything, almost all of them now are basically forcing the AI to do that grounded search in the first place so that it does have as up-to-date and factual information as possible.
So let's break it down with regards to AI visibility. Obviously, you've got the different LLMs. Mm-hmm. So with regards to Claude versus ChatGPT or versus Gemini, is that different? Should you be having to do different strategies for the different LLMs?
If you're wanting to be really, really granular, you're only going to target X AI model or X company, whatever, because that's where your user base is, then yes. But if your user base is all over the shop, which, and again, it can be, right? They could be using Gemini on their phones and somebody could be using ChatGPT on their desktop and another one might be using Claude at work or something like that. Then you want to kind of have a broader approach that takes in some of the generalized overlapping factors and signals that the AI models actually have. So there's some of them that will have, or some of them will have specific grounding changes, but there are generalized practices that they do. So they all look for official domains. They all look for documentation. They all look for PDFs. There's a bunch of other bits and pieces that they do, but almost all of them are also taking into account some level of training data to come up with the query in the first place. They're not just basing the query on your input, they're basing the query on your input plus what it knows about that niche as well. So being able to understand what the AI model already knows about your niche, you'll then be able to go and reverse engineer more and place on the sources that it already trusts and continually recommends.
Yeah, so if you're looking to increase AI visibility, right, then you're talking here about the live search. Let's say
Yes.
Google are using, but Gemini is using Google. You're saying that ChatGPT is using Bing,
Mhm.
right? But what about, you mentioned there a couple of times, the training data. How
Mhm.
can someone try to get into that training data? How long is it taking to get in there? And how can someone, they've got a brand and they want to be form part of the training data, how can they do that?
So the first one is, how long does it take? It depends on the company. Some of the companies are releasing a model every 2 to 3 months. Some of them are only releasing once a year, right? Dependent on that training data ingestion cycle will depend on how long it's going to take you to get in there. And it depends on, was that, and bear in mind, the last training date, it might say, oh, November 7th, right? But that doesn't mean that the specific source that you're on was last crawled November 7th. It might have been months prior to that. So the actual window is normally further along than the training cycle windows are. Now, most of the AI companies are still using Common Crawl. They're still using Internet Archive. They're using a bunch of PDF websites. They're downloading from like scribd.com, all of these different sites. So if you can get your content, your PDFs, your brand context across all of these overlapping file sources where all of the AI companies are generating and downloading information from, then you will usually be able to get into that next training set, because they're still downloading from those same areas. And they will continually do that, even if they did it on the last cycle. So if you can try and place your content into those data sets, then the next training iteration that uses that downloaded data set, you should be able to get into there. Now, how much information, how much data do you need in the training data set for it to be enough for it to actually build into the AI model, right? If you have, as an example, one PDF file with maybe one sentence about your brand, that's probably not going to be enough information to actually get ingested into the training data and absorbed as an element. Now, if you have 100 pages, 10 PDFs, and an entire website and all the guest posts and podcasts and all these things that have all been ingested, there's a much, much larger capacity to actually be ingested. So it's more of a volume game, but there's definitely weighting when it comes to the sources themselves.
So when you're talking there about a volume game, is that where people are then talking about consensus? Is that what you're talking about there?
So it's to get it picked up by the training data. It's a volume game, just from the sense that the more sources that you're on, the more likely it is that you're going to be put into the training data, but also the more likely it is that you're going to be downloaded by one of the AI company's engineers or something along those lines, or maybe even one of the AI agents that is now doing the downloading on behalf of the company. However, in terms of consensus, you want that data to say the same thing, to reinforce the same sentiment, to reinforce the same people and opinions and locations to do with that entity. If all of the different pages are saying completely different things, then it's very, very quickly going to confuse the training data, and it won't be able to trust it, and you actually will more than likely be ingested in a wrong way than being ingested in the right way. And that is something that is very important, because the more you get ingested in the wrong way at the beginning, the harder it is after the fact to change the AI's opinion about your business or about your entity.
Yeah, so on there, a lot of people talk about query fan outs.
Yes.
So should you be trying to, as a brand, trying to cover all the different query fan outs? Could be, let's say, under the reputation dimension, you've got like awards, case studies, testimonials, reviews. Should you be proactively trying to get them on third-party sources, not just on your own website, to try and build that consensus up? And also, I'm going to throw in another spanner into the works, is what about video? Should you be doing any sort of video? Can video be pulled into LLMs to improve AI visibility?
So specifically for Gemini, we found that even if a video doesn't have public transcripts, Gemini still has access to the transcripts in the back end. So Gemini can pull in from some secret YouTube API or something along those lines to actually be able to get the transcripts from videos that don't have public transcripts available. So for Gemini specifically, 100%. For other models, it's very dependent on if that model is prioritizing YouTube or not. As an example, ChatGPT and Claude tend to prioritize it quite differently, and especially depending on your query, if they prioritize video or not as well. But I would always say that, because, again, most people say LLMs, and actually they're not really LLMs anymore, because they're multimodal. And an LLM is literally just inputting language and inputting text. But if it can understand an input image, and it can understand an input video, and it can understand input audio, then it is much bigger than just an LLM. And I see most of the AIs moving towards that. So you definitely positioning your content not just in the single frame of text, but also in audio, also in video, also in imagery, and trying to build your entity and build your knowledge, understanding, and consensus around that across all of those different verticals.
Yeah, so anyone who's watching this, hope you like the video and the podcast with regards to how to increase AI visibility. Today, I'm joined with Charles Floate, and obviously it's been an absolute pleasure. Make sure you check out the links in the description. There's a lot of other videos where we're talking about how to rank in Bing search, which increases the exposure in ChatGPT, Parasite SEO, and what's working in today's algorithms. Charles, it's been an absolute pleasure.